There's zero doubt in my mind about the dividing line between intuitive excellence and intuitive mediocrity, which is otherwise known as the tragically delusional state of the dysfunctional empath. I've been privileged over the last few years to witness and support many brilliant, gifted, creative and soulful individuals in their inner work practice behind the scenes. And it's now crystal clear in my mind that there are two deciding factors for intuitive excellence. Number one, intentional daily practice, and number two, somatic trauma resolution. In this very special episode of Inner Work Essentials, I'm going to be showing you how to evolve your soul, so to speak, and witness God within via this twofold path, this double-threaded tapestry of practice and purification. But I'm going to begin with a potentially triggering analogy which will reveal the gap between, the very common gap actually, between identity and reality, or between narrative and actuality, with anyone who identifies as an empath or someone who's intuitive, in the same way that we can get caught up in stories that are old and no longer serve us. This is a big trap that people fall into, so listen to this comparison and see if it relates to you. We've all been in situations where we've gone to a party, or maybe we've gone to a coffee shop, and we bumped into a friend from high school who was probably the star athlete or otherwise had the glory days. They were 17, they were 18, and they were the king or the queen of the track and the field. And now they're overweight, spotty, out of shape, smoking, drinking, whatever it might be. A bit of a stereotype, but we know the type themselves. That's why a stereotype exists. This is the man or the woman who clings to his glory days or her glory days at the detriment of not realizing that they're no longer in shape, they're no longer attractive, and they're not even very healthy. In their mind, they almost live as if they are that 18-year-old version of themselves who is identified as being athletic and gifted in sport. The same tragedy occurs with people who I sometimes encounter, well actually I'll be honest, quite often encounter, who are in their late 20s, early 30s, and identified as an empathic or intuitive or spiritual type in their late teenage years or early 20s, but they haven't done the practice or the purification work at a deep enough level to actually earn the title of an intuitive person. This isn't to call anyone out in a way which is punitive or judgmental, but I want to make that emotional reality so clear that although it's a subtle thing, it's not as obvious when you're going to a party and you're meeting your intuitive friend from back in the day that they're not doing their practices, as obvious as it would be if the athlete is out of shape and clearly got a bad lifestyle. But you will know within yourself if you've actually done the work or not done the work, because the 10 years, 15 years, 20 years that's stretched behind you from this current moment watching this video, how much daily practice have you done? How much meditation, how many retreats, how many fasts, how many cleanses, how many books have you read, how much service, most importantly, have you brought forward from your intuitive capacity? And how much purification work have you done in regards to multi-level healing of unresolved childhood trauma? Anyone watching this video has likely done a mixture of the two at varying intensities, but my invitation is to be potentially more discerning in realizing that the identity label of empath or intuitive gifted person that I am becomes a self-limiting belief system which stops you progressing to that higher level of evolving your soul and witnessing God within as a daily phenomena. So where do we get into this? Well, let's go in with today's Inner Work Essential. I have not forgotten The Multidimensional Human by Kurt Leland. Kurt Leland is an interesting character. This is a very practical book and it goes into astral projection. I, again, am not too fixated on these kinds of esoteric topics as the main thing that I live for, but if you're gonna learn, you might as well learn from the masters. Kurt Leland has another wonderful book that I've got over there where he documents about 30 years of out-of-body astral projection, lucid dreaming experiences into a very comprehensive study. It's called Otherwhere by Kurt Leland if you're interested. It's very much the Robert Monroe style. But in this book, he's very practical. He draws upon theosophical education, particularly the works of Alice Bailey and Annie Besant and maybe Charles Leadbeater and all of those kind of early 20th century esotericists, and makes it practical. I could read some quotes. I could read some practices. There's about 30 practices in here that you can go through in your own time. And that's the number one step. That's the practice element. But what's the point of me sharing these practices if you're not actually going to consistently do a practice for multiple months and multiple years? It's not worth me even going into, because the majority of people that I encounter, even very gifted, spiritually brilliant people, cannot maintain a spiritual practice. Well, there's two ways. Either A, they can't maintain a spiritual practice at all, and they'll have stop-start, 1 week burst, 2 week burst, maybe a month if they're on a 30-day challenge, and then they will drop with the meditation. They can't keep half an hour a day, and yet they will continue to cling to the identity that they are a spiritual person who is serious about their world work. They won't do the actual work. It's a tragedy, because someone who's genuinely gifted, this is where my heart comes in, not to judge anyone, someone who is genuinely gifted, for them to not honor that gift is the equivalent of the star athlete declining into their 30s. Whereas if the star athlete continues to work on their gift, and they go to college and maybe they get a scholarship, and then they get into the professional leagues and they put in the work every day, multiple times a day, the analogy is not too far apart. You can have a wonderfully athletic person who's 18, can also have a professional elite level career by the time that they're in their mid-20s. This doesn't happen so often in spiritual circles because the intuitive lack of maturation, let's say, is to believe in feeling over discernment and to believe in flow over structure when it's at a dysfunctional stage. It's confronting, but I can guarantee that the reward of doing a daily meditation for 1 year, the reward of doing something like a journaling practice, or having a periodic fasting period, or having a reading practice every single morning for 90 minutes, or maybe in the evening, maybe split it between the two, but at least an hour a day. 1 hour a day, multiple years, that's you putting in the reps. That's the equivalent of bench pressing in the spiritual gym, because there's no bypassing the work, which takes us into step 2, the second thread. First we have practice, and we also have purification. The purification element is arguably the most important element when it comes to a certain season of your inner work journey. For myself, when I first got into meditation when I was 18, I had a very good practice. For about the first 3 years when I was meditating at college, I would be able to meditate with more or less consistency every day, sometimes during certain periods, twice a day. With full honesty, other periods I wouldn't meditate at all, but I'd say for about 70 to 80% consistency, I was good on my meditations. But meditation alone did very little compared to the purification work, because meditation is charging up, it's receiving in, it's opening up to intuition. It's that classic metaphor that I keep returning to of the pipe which pours in. You are the pipe, you receive the intuition. What happens if the pipe is clogged up? This is where we need somatic release work. There's a whole variety of ways to go into trauma resolution. This channel itself has drawn upon at least a dozen different modalities. You've got things like bioenergetics and things like somatic trauma release. You've got the other kinds of therapies where it's even more hands-on, things like Rolfing or Alexander technique. You've got the more cognitive trauma release therapies where it's something like Jungian psychotherapy or transpersonal psychotherapy. There's a whole variety of ways to get into the therapeutic space. The importance is that you clear out your body, primarily when it comes to intuitive gifted work. There is no substitute for healthy lifestyle. I guarantee that you cannot out-meditate a drinking habit, a smoking habit, a drug habit. Marijuana is a drug as well. I don't care what anyone says. Meditation will not save you from a daily weed habit. It just won't work. People get the feeling that they're more spiritual if they're smoking every day. You're actually just playing around in the lower levels, and you're not allowing yourself the possibility to get to those higher levels of discernment and intuition, and let alone giving back to the world. I mean, how many actively altruistic and humanistic hippies do you see out there who are smoking every day? Very few. They're too stoned. They're laying back. They're listening to music. They're having a good time. Cool, whatever. But you're not going to get very far with your giftedness. Drug elimination, huge part of purification. Diet elimination, it's something which people often go through. Usually there'll be a period of cutting out meat and animal products. Could be a period of a few months, could be a period of a few years, but it's a very common theme that someone goes vegan. I did it myself. I went pure vegan for about 6 months, and then vegetarian with fish. Not dairy. Dairy's an evil industry. I despise dairy. I think it's the cruelest of the cruel. Currently, after a few years of going all over the place, I eat fish and I eat eggs. Minimally, but I don't eat red meat or dairy. I think it's just doesn't suit me. I feel heavier, and I feel like it's something which lowers me, to put it in simple language. Not that it's a low activity or I'm trying to judge someone. Just by my experience, when I get around those products, I feel weighty, and you can almost feel, it's quite intuitive to even say, you can feel the suffering that's taken place behind the scenes in that factory farm or that slaughterhouse, and it no longer looks like a delicious meal in front of you. The same happens to me sometimes with fish, and that's why if I'm having a meal of fish, it's always sitting down, saying a prayer, gratitude to the animal, and still acknowledging the paradox that you're participating in a destructive industry, which is, it depends on how you fish, but the majority of fishing is destroying the ocean and destroying the ecosystem. So at least saying a prayer of, I acknowledge I'm doing this before you eat, while also welcoming, you can play in that paradox. Let's put diet aside. Sexual purification, that's another one for this inner work intuitive masterclass. You will not be able to get all of the creative juices that you have inside of yourself fully flowing freely if you are caught up in sexual dysfunction or sexual trauma. Pornography addiction, incredibly common. If you still have that, that's really in the way. There are many, many wonderful resources and lots of videos on YouTube to go into that. I guarantee it will be a night and day difference to be able to free yourself from that particularly evil drug. Not evil in the sense that the people who are participating in it are all evil across the board, but the effects that it has on the human soul and the lowering of consciousness across the board is definitely something that you should consider eliminating from your life. Of course, have wonderfully meaningful and engaging relationships with flesh and blood people instead. But if you're going down any form of sex addiction, any form of sexual compulsion, or generally misusing your sexual energy and don't have a creative outlet, that's going to be another thing to pay attention to. What else do we have purification-wise? Returning back into the trauma itself, doing inner child work, doing parts work, doing shadow work, all the themes I've explored on this channel, they are essential. And the mindset that I invite you to have during this two-step process of practice and purification is that they are not steps and then you're done. It's the many steps along the spiral. It's 2 steps or 2 feet. It's walking on the left foot and the right foot as the spiral of development unfolds. I'll frame it a bit more simply. You need both together in an everyday, long-term sense to make progress along that evolution of the soul and witnessing the God within. It's a game of percentages. It's a spectrum of purification, a spectrum of how intentional is your practice. We're not trying to be holier than thou. We're not trying to be pure aesthetic monks who are living away from the world and refusing to engage. This is again another spiritual shadow of someone who spends too long in the hippie circles, too long reading spiritual books, and refuses to engage in the real world or the everyday world or the normal world with any sense of genuine groundedness or an ability to actually be able to have regular conversation with someone. Sure, you can have a preference for a spiritual, esoteric, philosophical deep dive, but if you're at the gym or you're at the grocery store, you don't need to mention to everyone about your crystal collection or what you saw in your dream last night. That's obviously the dysfunctional element. I'll bring it all back in. Number one invitation for this video. Acknowledge the distance or potential distance between who you believe yourself to be and who you actually are in regards to your spiritual capacity. This is a confronting image of the high school athlete who needs to realize when he's 29 and he's sat on the sofa and he's burping and he's like, ugh, oh wow, I'm not 18 anymore. I need to get to the gym, get myself back in shape, and be willing to go through that 1-2 year process of becoming potentially in the best shape of his life. It's still possible. That's an invitation I really invite you to make right now in this video. Where is the story gap? How much practice do you actually do? How often do you actually meditate? How engaged are you with the literature? And most importantly of all, service. How much do you intend to give back? The evolution of the soul, as we've explored in a previous episode about Born to Serve, I'll link up over here, is primarily through service and connection. If you're refusing to bring forwards your spiritual giftedness or your intuitive intelligence in a way which gives back to the world around you, you are better suited to go off to an ashram somewhere and live in meditation all day. People will go through seasons where they do this. I spent 3 weeks in an ashram in Portugal. I was volunteering. I wasn't meditating the whole time. I've done a variety of fasts for multiple days without food or water. It's good for a season. But the majority of people need a life where they can go into that season and then a much longer season where they're in the world. Acknowledge the limitations and acknowledge where your growth potential might be, and then put in the practice. And then number 2, the practice itself is complemented by the purification. This is the inner work. This is the 6-month, 12-month period of really doing the trauma healing. It's getting it out of your system. It's unclogging the pipe so that intuition can flow freely, and then service can flow on the other end of that. It's a really easy to explain concept. It's a very difficult to enact process. You need both. I hope the message is clear. If all you take away from this video is a sense of urgency and a bit of a stern reflection that you need both practice and purification in tandem for multiple years, then my job's done. I'm not trying to be too hard on anyone either. I have been and continue to be in this process of reflecting where I may be not too strong in my practice, where I maybe have unresolved traumas I'm still trying to work through. We're all on this journey together. My hope is that you take it as seriously as it deserves to be taken, and you put in the work to clean yourself up and show up in the world in a place where we can be more brilliant and more loving and inspire more of that in the people around us. Next episode of Inner Work Essentials, we're going to be continuing into the abstract and the esoteric with a bit more psychological, and we're going to be looking at chaos theory and psychotherapy and the intersection of science, spirituality, and trauma. It's an interesting synthetic video. I'll see you over there.